I still think the two don't mix. It's like oil and water. I don't think you can harmonize yoga with Christianity at all. Um, and why put yourself close to the flame? You know, why do that? And I think people don't realize that it's a spiritual practice. It's not just an exercise. It's not just breathing. It's not just meditation. There's a spiritual element to all of these things. And that by doing the practice, you're agreeing with, you've gone into a covenant with those spiritual elements.
Well, my name's Mark Powell. Welcome to another edition of AP's Profiles in Christian Living. My special guest with me this morning is Ruth Burgess. Ruth has a fascinating story, which I'm sure you'll be intrigued by. She was a former yogi, Swami, and now is a Christian. In fact, has been working in chaplaincy down here in Hobart. Ruth, welcome. It's great to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's wonderful to be here.
So I've got to ask, how does a nice girl like you get involved in yogi to such an extent that you, for 30 odd years were in an ashram, but you were a Swami? How do you come from, well, you didn't grow up in that system, but how did you get involved?
Okay. So I think that the essential thing was that I never had a sense of inner peace as a child growing up. There was a fair amount of disharmony in my home living, and I always felt a little bit anxious, and I carried that anxiety with me through childhood. I wasn't exactly depressed, but I was always a fairly anxious person looking for inner peace. There were also a lot of influences in my life, like my mum was a Christian and my dad was a Buddhist, or at least very influenced by Eastern philosophies and mysticism. And I went to a Quaker school. So I had a varied spiritual diet, a lot of different influences impacting on me. But I think the root cause was probably an existential crisis when I was about 6, believe it or not. I know existentialism tends to happen to people a bit later in life, but perhaps not always. When I was 6, my grandmother died, and that in itself isn't unusual, but my reaction was quite extreme. I went into a kind of questioning phase, depression at that time when I was 6, and I would have called it an existential crisis because what I thought was that we lived forever until that point, until she died. So I realized that I will die and all of those people around me that I love will die. And it led to the questioning about the meaning of life, really. What's the purpose if we're all going to die?
See, that's fascinating because, I mean, on a number of levels, I think I can still remember as a young child myself having existential questions, and we often minimize or wash over the questions that very young people have, but we shouldn't, should we?
No.
Okay, so what happens then? Where does the journey begin to yoga and to becoming a Swami?
Yeah. So there was a sense of unsettledness in me, a sense of anxiety, a sense of restlessness, and I carried that through into my teenage years, that restlessness. I got exposed to yoga at school as a school elective, and I remember thinking that the yoga teacher was very peaceful and composed, and that's what I was seeking for myself, was that composure, that inner peace. But then as life just happened and I went off and did various things, I tried uni. I passed all my uni subjects, but I left. I actually went to live with a boyfriend at the time. So my morality at that time was certainly not a Christian morality. I was very much influenced by the hippie era that I'd been a child through and a teenage through. So I was rather purposeless, living with a boyfriend who, very intelligent person, very interested in Eastern philosophies, and he and his brother led me to read various books that I'd now categorize as philosophical existential writers, New Age writers like Carlos Castaneda.
Mm.
Those sorts of influences, again, were impacting on my life.
Mm.
And the whole idea of enlightenment and reaching some alternative or higher state of consciousness started to impress me too. So at this point, I was late teens, early 20s.
Mm.
And again, they were the influences around me without me having a direct purpose, a direct idea of what I wanted to do in life. I really didn't have a clue.
Mm.
I was blessed really with skills and talents, and I always thought to myself I could probably do whatever I wanted. The problem was I didn't know what I wanted.
Mm.
So I was just floating around, experimenting in a rather bohemian lifestyle,
Mm.
trying out a few different things, odd jobs, all
So
sorts of
Carlos
things.
Castaneda,
Yeah,
that's fascinating
yeah,
because he was really into shamans
yeah,
and
yeah,
magic
yeah,
mushrooms and all the rest of it.
that's right.
In your hippie
Yeah.
phase of life,
Mm-hmm.
was drugs part
Mm-hmm.
of that for you as well?
Yeah, to a limited extent, though, because I was really sensitive. I tried
Mm.
marijuana, like
Mm.
most of my friends, pretty much all of them.
Mm.
And it affected me quite a lot. Like, I remember the first time I ever tried it, I actually fainted.
Mm.
So, I think it was hash, and it
Mm.
was laced hash. And I
Right.
remember just passing out. And that really worried me. I thought, well, I can't be like my friends. I'm
Mm.
just too sensitive for these drugs.
Okay.
So I didn't get too much involved in them at all. I think I tried it once more and didn't enjoy it. So,
Mm.
and in a way, that was fortunate that I didn't go down that path that a lot of my friends were going down.
Mm.
Yeah. But certainly, again, it was exposure to those things, that hippie lifestyle, the drugs, sex, drugs, rock and roll, that,
Yeah.
that whole,
Okay, so what's the
yeah,
trajectory from the bohemian lifestyle, which I'm sure a lot of people out there
yeah.
have been exposed to or maybe
Mm-hmm.
participated in themselves,
Mm-hmm.
to becoming full on?
Into yoga.
Yeah.
Yeah. So because of that drifting purposelessness that I had, uh, I realized that couldn't go on, that I needed to find a purpose. And I think once again, seeking inner peace, I sought
Mm.
out an ashram, and it seemed to be a very authentic ashram
Okay.
in Hobart at that time. And it was authentic as far as Australian ashrams go. And the teacher was a Swami, and I was very impressed by the authenticity and by the discipline and by the practices. And I thought, there's something in this. There's something in this Eastern mystical approach which might help me to find the inner peace
Mm.
that I'm seeking. So I started attending yoga regularly and almost became addicted to yoga. I would say yoga was my drug.
Mm.
It helped me to feel good, at least initially. I had the experience of feeling healthier
Mm-hmm.
because I love stretching my body. I'd done ballet for 7 years. I'd done gym. I'd always been quite fit until I went into the party scene.
Mm.
So as a younger person, I'd been fairly fit. And
Mm.
I love the experience of stretching my body and feeling fit. But also yoga, initially at least, gave me some tools for mental relaxation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's
So, with every kind of drug, there's that taste, there's that buzz or that hit that you get. What was it that you were getting in yoga?
mm. Good feelings, really. You might say
Mm.
good vibes, particularly through singing.
Okay.
I really love music. And again, it was something I was quite skilled at. I was in the Tassie Youth Orchestra. I
Okay.
played the flute,
Mm.
also always sang. And in yoga, we did a lot of chanting, a lot of singing. And we were chanting what are called mantras.
Mm.
And mantras, according to the yogis, have powerful vibrations and apparently, according to the yogis, affect your state of consciousness. So we would sit and chant mantras. And I think what it did for me was to relax the cognitive or the intellectual side of my mind and just just elevate
Mm.
my consciousness, probably,
Mm.
in the sense that yogis talk about it. So a feeling of relaxation, a feeling of joy,
Mm.
because I believed in what I was doing as well.
Mm.
I believed
So
in that
how
part.
far into, because I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people that have experienced that kind of health benefits and mental relaxation, but how far in was it till you started to have that spiritual connection with yoga?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. Let me think about that. I think the spiritual connection crept up on me as quite quickly, actually,
Mm.
because I realized after practicing yoga, doing the exercises called asanas, doing the pranayama, which are the breathing techniques, doing the meditation, chanting mantras, I realized that those things were helping me to feel, initially at least, a little bit happier and healthier.
Mm-hmm.
So they gave me a good, as I said, some good vibes, good feelings
Mm.
initially. And that initial carrot, if you like, led me to explore the philosophy even more deeply.
Mm.
So I think the practices themselves can make people feel good, and that leads people into a deeper spiritual exploration of Eastern mysticism. So it creeps up on you. And once you engage your mind as well into
Mm.
exploring and trying to understand the philosophy of yoga,
Mm.
there is more foundation to your practice.
Now, you became a Swami, and I want to
Mm-hmm.
get to that in a minute,
Mm-hmm.
because you didn't just remain at a novice level. You
Mm-mm.
went
Right in.
all right in, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there'll be a lot of people listening to this right now that would be going, well, I don't need to go all righty. I'm a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's a lot of Christians that are either nervous or actually opposed to yoga and don't think the two things are compatible.
Mm.
Uh, what do you say to people that say, I can take the fruit, if you like, of yoga, but not the root of the philosophy?
Mm.
Some churches might even have yoga classes in their halls and things like that.
Mm.
What's your response to that question?
Mm. Yeah, it's something that I've thought quite a lot about, because yoga is rooted in Hinduism. So, as a Christian, you'd call it a pagan practice, and you could even see the asanas, the exercises, as devotion in motion. Many of the exercises revere Hindu gods and goddesses, or mythological beings from Hindu tales. So it's very much intertwined with Hinduism. It's a very hard thing to pull apart from Hinduism, yoga. So it's rooted in Indian philosophy, in Hinduism. And it's a technique, it's a spiritual technique. It's not just about exercise. So these techniques are spiritual practices, whether you're aware of them or not. That's what you're doing. You're doing a spiritual practice. And all of the practices lead to what the yogis would call God consciousness, or becoming one with the universe, or they even call it Christ consciousness these days.
Mm.
So all of these practices are intertwined with Hinduism and Eastern philosophies.
Mm.
So it's a very hard thing to extricate, to pull apart from Hinduism.
Mm.
So you could, in theory, say, I can do the stretches, but and maybe in some situations, some of the stretches are very much like what you might find in a gym class.
Mm.
Yeah, but it's the way a yoga class is conducted. It's the environment that you're in when you're practicing yoga.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way the exercises are even done, with awareness, often with breathing practices connected to the exercises, with visualization techniques, with awareness of energy centers and energy pathways called chakras and nadis. So yoga is, it's a whole paradigm. It's a part of a world, a worldview.
Mm.
And I would say that you could, as a Christian, I'd be very wary of going into a yoga class because of the relationship yoga has with Hinduism, and because it's designed to be a spiritual practice.
Mm.
There's a lot more that could be said about this. I'm not sure whether that
Well, yeah.
answers it.
Well, no, I think it's a very good answer. I just wanted to ask maybe a hard question in
Mm-hmm.
this regard because of the very spiritual nature
Mm-hmm.
of it.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like really being involved in yoga is a form of really being involved in the occult.
Yeah, I would say so. Definitely. Yeah.
Because you're opening yourself up to spiritual entities,
Yeah.
to spiritual beings.
Yeah.
Can you describe from your own experience what that was like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, from my own experience, I was always a little wary of meditation. I'll be perfectly honest.
Mm.
Um, I was worried about meditation. I was worried about losing control. I didn't ever want to lose control. But some of the experiences I had were red flags to me that you will lose control in some way or other.
So what happened?
Well, when I used to have to do an hour of meditation in the morning for a while as part of what we call a sadhana, which is sadhana means spiritual practice in the ashram.
Mm.
And I'd be chanting Om for an hour, and I would lose awareness of my body's boundaries, so where my body ends and the atmosphere around me begins. So I'd lose awareness of that. I would feel like I was floating or expanding. Sometimes I'd feel like the room was spinning around me, and I actually remember opening my eyes and the room was spinning. And this was not Meniere's disease, or it wasn't some kind of imbalance in my ears. It was a real experience, that I was having.
Mm.
So those sort of physical feelings worried me. I didn't enjoy them.
Mm.
But I had also the experience of hearing sounds. So I would hear music that wasn't actually being played. And I didn't actually enjoy these experiences. I didn't like the idea of losing control. But I think that I was saved in some ways from more disturbing experiences that I have heard other people have when they indulge in occultic practices like psychic attacks and spiritual attacks of sorts. There was one time I felt a spiritual attack, and it was when I was lying down in what we call yoga nidra, which is a relaxation practice. And I remember feeling not being able to move. I wanted to be able to move my body, but it was paralyzed. And I remember having a sense of great fear, like almost primal fear, and a sense that I was really not happy, not being able to move and experiencing this terror. I wanted to call out, or, there was an internal kind of sense of screaming for help. And it lasted a fair while, and then it just went. But that was another experience that I think was something of a spiritual attack.
Do you think it was a spiritual being that was doing
Possibly,
that?
possibly. I have heard that the yoga master that we lived with actually visited people in dreams and transformed himself into different beings. So, like, yeah.
Like what sort of beings?
So what I've heard is was able to shapeshift, if you've heard of that. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly what beings, but different beings.
And so what, as a cat or as another person?
No,
Yeah.
it was actually as a cat, as a type of cat.
Right. And so he could come and commune with people while being physically in his body somewhere else.
It's just a story I've heard, but
Yeah.
but it's not beyond shamans or yogis to do these sorts of things.
Okay, so I've got to ask the Dorothy Dix question.
Yeah.
What actually is a Swami?
Okay, Swami means master of the self.
Okay.
That's the aspiration. It's like a title you get
Right.
before you've actually become a master of yourself. I would
Right.
say I have never become a master of myself. I
Mm.
became a Swami when I was 23.
Mm.
I'm now 64.
Mm.
I'm not a master of myself.
Who designates you? Do you take on the title yourself, or does a
No.
group of other swamis say you're now a swami?
It's an inner sense of dedication to it's an aspiration
Mm.
and a dedication. And you ask a guru for initiation.
Mm.
Yeah. And that's how it happened.
Okay, so that leads me into my next question then, because you were all in. You
Mhm.
lived in an ashram for over 30 years.
I actually lived in the ashram for almost 20 years,
Okay.
but I was a Swami for 35 years.
Okay. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
To talk us through, what is it like to live in an ashram?
Well, I lived in the ashram in two phases. One in my 20s, from the age of about 25 to 27, 25, 26, 27, 3 years.
Mm.
And it was really basic then. It was very austere, the ashram. There was no hot water in the mornings,
Ugh,
so we had cold showers. And I was living in the mountains west of Gosford.
that's it. I'm out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I was young and enthusiastic and a little bit gung-ho. So, it appealed to me actually,
Mm.
sort of doing this austerity thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we had cold showers. We did our practices on wooden floors. It wasn't, a 5-star Bali retreat kind of get your certificate over the weekend deal. And we practiced about 2 hours of yoga sadhana in the mornings from 4 o'clock in the morning to 6. That's supposed to be a special time where the atmosphere is, it's called Brahmahutta, a special time where the atmosphere is really harmonious from 4 to 6.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's when we did our sadhana. Then we had breakfast and we had to observe silence at breakfast. So we did that. And then we worked in the ashram, and depending what department we were in. So we could be gardeners, cooks in the printing press, teaching, different departments, admin. It was quite a big setup. When I was there in the 80s, there were probably about 100 residents.
Wow.
Full time. But yeah, it was the life was hard work. We called it karma yoga. Karma yoga means working selflessly, but also working with meditative awareness. And it's meant in itself to be a path to enlightenment. Karma
So as you're
yoga.
working in the garden,
Yeah.
it's
working
another
in the
form of yoga exercise, you could
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Everything was everything you did was a
Mm.
dedication to spiritual life.
Mm.
I mean, you would even see that yourself, Mark, in what you do. Everything you do
Yeah.
is for God.
Yeah.
We have the same attitude. Everything we did was for Guru, and in my mind it was for God, even though my idea of God wasn't a biblical idea of God.
Yeah, it reminds me of Romans 12, therefore offer your bodies as living
Yeah,
sacrifices.
absolutely.
This is your spiritual act of worship.
Precisely. And
Yeah.
that's what karma yoga was to me.
Mm.
So wherever we were told to be, because we submitted to the Guru's direction and spiritual guidance, whatever we were told to do, we did. And it could be tough. My first job when I was in my early or mid-20s was to weed the entire ashram. And I did this. It took me 3 weeks. And I weeded every day for hours on end. That's what it was. And we saw it, I think it's spiritual pride, but we saw it as a way of reducing our ego and our attachments.
See, that's interesting. It's
Yeah.
really interesting you say that, because as you were talking, I thought it sounds like the worship of self. Ironically, through the negation of self. But is that a fair thing to say?
I do think that's a fair thing to say, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Negation and pride in your negation, pride in austerity, is a trap. It's a spiritual trap.
Yeah.
And I think we can become proud even as Christians in what we do for service.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful of that spiritual pride.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
And it's in all organisations.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
definitely, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis calls it the great sin in mere
Right.
Christianity.
Right.
Yeah, because it's the heart of all enmity between each other and even God, is we set ourselves up to be God.
Yeah.
So you were not just involved in the ashram, you
Mhm.
traveled the world,
Mhm.
lecturing,
Mhm.
learning. Can you tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about those experiences?
Yeah. So what I was describing was the austere kind of ashram in the
Yep.
80s,
Yep.
and that period of 3 years there. And that was kind of my training ground, really. That's where I learnt to become a teacher. And so I'll talk about the other
Mm.
afterwards, but that's where I did the hard yards and I learnt to become a teacher. And we were posted, if that was going to be our dharma, our duty, our seva, all these words, if that was going to be what we did for our guru and for our spiritual growth, then we were posted to different ashrams around Australia. And at that time, there were 40 branch ashrams. So the main
Wow.
ashram and about 40 ashrams. And so we
All
were,
connected, Ruth?
yeah, all connected to
Mm.
this one organization. And the mother of that organization was in India, in
Mm.
Bihar. So at one time, I was teaching up to 20 classes a week in Manly ashram. And that was really full on. Like, that was a lot of yoga classes, really.
Mm.
And it was very tiring and hard to sustain, but I did it. But towards the end of that 3 years, I met the person that would become my husband.
Mm.
And because relationships weren't sanctioned in the ashram, we left together. And then
Mm.
I spent 12 years outside of the ashram doing other things, but also continuing to teach yoga because I always felt that that was my path
Mm.
and that that was my duty and that I was really a yoga missionary,
Yeah.
continuing to spread the word.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I continued to do that. And then after 12 years outside, and we did various things, we had an organic garden. My husband was a chef, and we went to Noosa and he did his chef work, and I became a naturopath and worked in a pharmacy, and installed herbal remedies in that pharmacy and wrote articles but continued to teach yoga. Then after that, in the year 2000, we decided to go back to the ashram. We were actually invited back to the ashram. The ashram had lost a lot of people, but it was going through a regrowth phase
Mm.
and it was going through a redefinition phase as well. No longer just an ashram, it was going to become an academy of yoga. And because we'd all been teaching yoga for many years and we were trusted within our organization
Mm.
and we were swamis, we came back to the ashram and a group of us, I think there were about 7 of us,
Mm.
created the first yoga teaching diploma,
So this is fully accredited.
fully accredited by the
Mm.
Australian government. So that took us about 7 years to create that yoga diploma.
It's massive.
Yeah, and it was in that time that we were traveling around various academies in America, in Europe, in China, and
Mm.
New Zealand. So we did a lot of lecture tours, but also helping other academies to
Mm.
develop their own teacher training equivalent.
But then the bombshell hits, doesn't it? Because the academy is no longer, the
Correct.
ashram is closed.
Yeah.
There's a royal commission
Yeah.
into sexual abuse.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
What
Okay.
happened there?
So
Walk us through that.
yeah. All
'Cause-
right. So 15 years of involvement in the ashram at this point, full-time commitment, teaching and so on. Around about 2010, so after I'd done about 10 years, I became a little itchy. I got a little bit of cabin fever. I got a little bit tired of being in the ashram and thought about what else could I do? What would I do if I left the ashram? My husband still wanted to stay at the ashram, so I was pretty much stuck there. But I wasn't enjoying it so much anymore. That was after creating all these courses and doing all the lecturing, but I didn't feel like I wanted to be there for the rest of my life. I felt this isn't really going to work for me. So I asked for permission to study, and I got a degree in nursing at 2009 to 2011, I think it was, at the Uni of Newcastle. So I was still living in the ashram, but I went and got a degree thinking that one day we'll probably leave. And as it turned out, in 2014, there was a royal commission held to investigate institutional sexual abuse. And our organisation was one of those that was investigated. And it was shocking. It was absolutely devastating to me to find out what had gone on, without us knowing, really. And this had happened back in the 80s, but all of it was coming to light in 2014, amongst a lot of other institutions. But what it did for me was dispel or disillusion me, really. And I like the word disillusion. It was to take the scales from my eyes.
Because you were under an illusion.
Yeah. I really thought the yoga masters, the yoga gurus were God men. And that's the status that these people have in Eastern countries, in India. They're seen as God men. They're seen as having a direct conduit, a direct relationship with God. So I thought that they were leading us, in a beneficial way for our spiritual growth.
Because is the expectation, Ruth, that as God men, they're to be holy as in chaste?
Well, that's a good question because there are different kinds of God men in India. So tantric God men do not have the same morality or boundaries.
Okay.
They're transgressive. So they don't have the morality boundaries that Judeo-Christian world would, agree with. So tantric gurus use sex, for example, to help attain enlightenment.
So as a spiritual practice?
As a spiritual practice.
Right.
Regardless if you're married or not married to that person. So our guru was both, he had tantric and Vedic influences.
Right.
So there had always been this idea about sex in the ashram, that it was permissible between consenting adults, whether you're married or not.
Wow.
But not to become involved emotionally with the person.
To remain detached.
Correct. Yeah. So this, from a Christian point of view, of course, is not right. But from the yoga, spiritual technology kind of practices, then it was simply seen as a practice.
So is there a lot of what we would consider from a Judeo-Christian point of view, was there a lot of immorality in
You would
ashrams?
consider it immorality, yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because I know you've also had experience with, I saw a Netflix documentary, Wild Wild Country, with, I'm gonna muck up their name, okay? I'm just gonna call them the Orange People.
Yeah.
You can say it better and more accurately.
Yeah.
Is that in any way related to what you were involved in?
They took it to another level.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I think in our organisation, certainly smoking hashish was something that people did in Indian ashrams, so that was okay. Sex for tantric reasons, supposedly, was seen as okay.
Does that cause a lot of jealousy?
Of course. Yes. Of course it does. Yeah. Yeah, because no one's, we're all really human after all. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, the Rajneesh group you're talking about,
Yeah.
or the Osho devotees, they were into all kinds of experimental yogic practices, and some of them definitely were transgressive practices.
And they became cultic, didn't they? They became almost like a doomsday cult.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about doomsday, but it might have been.
Well, they had weapons
Yeah, they were
and things like
worried.
that.
They were worried about people infiltrating them, I suppose. Yeah, you're right.
So the
Mm.
key question, though,
Yeah.
how did you become a Christian then? You're involved in all of this.
Yeah,
I could imagine you could throw up your arms in the air and go, that's it, I'm done with all spirituality.
pretty much at the time. So,
How did you then become
yeah.
a Christian?
Okay. So in 2014, after we heard all these revelations and we realized that, well, I at least realized that the God men were not who we thought they were, that kind of shattered my whole faith, actually, in Eastern mysticism. So that's because the guru is a foundation almost for Eastern mysticism. What they say goes, and you need to trust, the oral teachings and the transmission of energy and all the other
Yep.
mystical ideas that surround the guru. So when the guru fell in my estimation, that's when the whole thing just started crumbling. The whole castle fell down.
Mm.
The castle, which was a sand castle after all in my mind now, just fell
Wow.
down. And
That
for
must have
about,
been devastating.
it was devastating because I had put so much energy into that. It was the only
Mm.
thing I really thought I was good at, actually, was teaching yoga and meditation, and singing in the ashram. And I
Mm.
produced a couple of CDs, singing CDs. So it was like my whole career just fell away.
Mm.
My raison d'etre fell away. And I went into a kind of spiritual vacuum abyss for a couple of years. I really just sat back and thought, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just going to get on with nursing, which is what I did. Um, and yeah, I tried to develop my nursing. I did courses upon courses. I think I was just trying to keep busy. And also, we needed to earn money because we'd been working for a very small stipend
Yeah.
for 20 years of our
You
life.
basically wouldn't have been able to save any money.
We were fortunate that there was a little bit of money towards the end. There was a super. We did super towards the end.
Wow.
So there was a little bit there, which was fortunate, more so for my husband than me. Anyway, so we had a little bit of money, but not much for our age. For our age, we're pretty poor. So the nursing came in handy, and I just got involved in that. But I was in a spiritual kind of abyss for a while, and then I realized that I really need spiritual direction because it had been such a big part of my life. Spiritual life was important to me.
Yeah.
And it had been my main thing.
Mm.
So I remembered church. I remembered church because I'd gone to church for quite a few years with my mother. And I remember it feeling good. The same sort of thing I was talking about with yoga initially, feeling good. And I went back to church and I got involved in reading the Bible. And when I read the Bible, it just confirmed for me that this was the truth. I just had a strong sense that the Bible is the truth. What I had been looking for all these years had been there all along from my childhood, through my mother, really.
What truths or truth
Mm.
particularly impressed you?
Jesus, what he did for us. No guru I know would have done what he did. The gurus I knew, or my understanding of them, was about self-realization, enlightenment.
It's all about them.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Mm.
Even though they did good works too, and charitable works, But
But you can still do that out of a sense of self-righteousness and pride, can't you?
you can, yeah. But I don't know any guru who would have gone to the cross.
Mm.
So that's what impressed me, was
Mm.
that self-sacrifice.
Mm. So was there a moment, do you think, where you crossed from dark to light? Or was it a gradual thing?
I think it was a gradual thing. I can't recall any single moment, any revelatory moment or epiphany as such. there were just little confirmations, little things that happened, and they were confirming my path. But it was really reading the Bible that really spoke the truth to me. I knew that what I was reading was true. That's all I can say about it. I guess that was the Holy Spirit.
As I have started at Cornerstone Hobart as a pastor, I ask everybody I meet in the congregation this. I'd be interested to hear your answer.
Yeah.
If there's one verse from the Bible which summarizes for you the promise of the gospel, what would you say it is?
It would be about peace.
Mm.
Yeah. I don't always remember these verses very well, but my peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you.
So all those years you were looking for peace in the New Age, in yoga. Did you find it?
No. I found momentary, moments of peace, but nothing solid. Back to the idea of the sandcastle just, dissolving. Nothing solid.
Have you found it in Jesus?
I believe so. Yeah.
And what's it
absolutely.
like?
Well, I think as you face the difficulties in life, you know that there is a promise of that Jesus is there with you, that he's been through difficulties and real suffering, and he understands. And so there's the promise of comfort, and there's the promise of a future eternal life, which I didn't have in yoga. In yoga, we believed in reincarnation, and that could be thousands of lifetimes. And that was in my mind, a very depressing thought, coming back for thousands of times and never being too sure of where you were on the continuum of freedom, of moksha, what we call moksha, liberation. So in yoga, I was never aware of where I was on that continuum.
Yeah.
And in the idea of reincarnation, you can slip back in to, an animal form. You could be reincarnated as an animal. Extremely depressing thought as far as I'm concerned. So as a Christian, we do believe, that once this body has done its work, once we die, we will be resurrected.
Okay, so how's your life changed since becoming a Christian? No more difficulties?
Sure, there are difficulties, lots of difficulties. And I think it's the comfort that I have, the reassurance that through the difficulties, through the storm, Jesus is there, and the promise of eternal life is there, and the ultimate freedom from affliction, from suffering is there. Yeah. So I still have difficulties, definitely.
One of my favourite verses is Ephesians 2, 8 to
Yeah.
10. For
Yeah.
by grace you have been saved through faith.
Yeah.
It's not from yourselves, it's a
Yeah.
gift of God, not by works that no one can boast.
Yeah.
Then it says, for we are God's workmanship created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which he has prepared in advance for us to do. What do you think of the good works God has for Ruth Burgess?
I think a lot about this. I guess I'm going to have to leave it to him, because at the moment, I'm hoping that I can serve him in some meaningful way through my story. So that would be good works. Through perhaps writing a book, which I've started to write. Maybe some future chaplaincy as well.
You have worked as a chaplain.
I have worked as a chaplain, yes.
How's that?
Yeah, that was good. That was really good. Yeah. But due to our financial situation, I just needed to find a little bit more work than what was on offer. So I may be going back into nursing. However, I'll keep my eye out for more chaplaincy
But you do
work.
do speaking engagements as well, don't you? Because you've done one for us, and I know you've done one for other churches, but if there are churches out there that might like
Sure.
a former Swami to come and present and talk about the dangers of yoga, which I think actually, I must say, I've done a lot of study on other religions, but your presentation was, in all honesty, the best I'd seen. so clear and compelling.
Yeah.
Would you be open to people
Absolutely.
contacting you
Yeah.
to come and talk?
Yeah, I would. I think it makes use of that time, that
Mm,
35 years of real experience in yoga and
mm,
what it's all about. And it makes use of that for me. So, yeah, I'd definitely be happy to speak to other groups.
mm.
And I do have a PowerPoint, but it's not death by PowerPoint. It's actually
No,
quite
it's not.
useful.
It's
There's some
excellent.
really good photos and you get a flavour, an idea of
It is
what it's
brilliant.
like.
It really is. I've seen it firsthand, and it was. I think you spoke for maybe an hour and a half,
Yeah, yeah.
and there was not a bored face in the room, and it was packed. I was impressed, and
Good.
I've seen bored faces.
You told me that.
That's right. I'm a preacher, right? I know what boredom looks like, but
Yeah,
yours was definitely not boring.
yeah.
Two last
Yeah.
questions. Number one.
Mhm.
Those that are exploring yoga and are listening to all of this and have got to this point and are still thinking, "Pah, I think she's being melodramatic.
Yeah.
I think I can have my cake and eat it too." What would
Mhm.
you say to the person that's dabbling in yoga
Mhm.
and going to church on Sunday?
Mm. I still think the two don't mix. It's like oil and water. I don't think you can harmonize yoga with Christianity at all. Um, and why put yourself close to the flame? You
Mm.
know, why do that? There are other exercises that are perfectly safe and perfectly fine to do. There are other ways of relaxation, relaxing. You don't need to do yoga to relax, and you don't need to do yoga to be fit. I'd stay away from yoga. That's my honest reaction to that. And I think people don't realize that it's a spiritual practice.
Mm.
It's not just an exercise. It's not just breathing. It's not just meditation. There's a spiritual element to all of these things. And that by doing the practice, you're agreeing with, you've gone into a covenant with those spiritual elements. And by doing the meditation practices, you're opening yourself up, I believe, to
Mm.
spiritual attack. Yeah.
So it really is a case, isn't it, of
Hmm.
being unequally yoked,
Yep.
like Paul says in 2 Corinthians?
I believe so. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. You can't marry light with darkness.
Um, I I do have a second question, but before I get to it,
Yeah.
though, it just intrigues me that because you're talking about so many spiritual realities,
Mm.
what experience or necessity is there of deliverance for people that have been involved
Mm.
in the
Yeah.
occult of yoga?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question. Um, I think when people dabble in the occult, there will definitely be, it depends how deeply they've gone into the occult.
Mm,
Um, some people may become possessed and need deliverance. Um, certainly, people can become oppressed, and even Christians can become oppressed. I
mm,
don't believe Christians can become possessed.
mm.
I think they can
Yeah,
become oppressed.
yeah.
So, if they start involving themselves in occult practices, they will suffer
Yeah, I like
from
that distinction too.
oppression.
Yeah, we have the
Yeah.
Holy Spirit. We can't be possessed, but
No.
yet we can be externally
Yeah.
pressed
I
upon.
think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as far as deliverance goes, faith. Faith will deliver you from fear. And I'm not a fan of deliverance ministries.
Mm,
Mm.
mm.
I
Why is
think
that?
I think that they can turn the focus onto the satanic
And away
side
from Jesus
and away from
and
Jesus.
his
Yeah.
supremacy and victory.
Correct. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
interesting.
So it's a shift
It's
of
a good point.
focus. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, very good insight. Um, okay, here's my final question.
Mm.
What about for the person out there, might even be a very young person
Mm.
listening, watching this,
Mm.
and they are where you were when you were 6 years old, and they
Mhm.
have that existential crisis, and they go, "What's my life all about? How
Mm.
do I find peace? How do I find meaning?" Um, what would you say to them about that and about Jesus?
Mm.
If you could go back in time and talk to the little Ruth,
Yeah.
what would you say?
Well, there'd be a lot of comfort you could offer as a Christian
Mm,
to the little 6-year-old who worries about death and
mm,
worries about suffering and the
Mm.
impermanence of life. I think that if you were a Christian parent, you could offer so much. You could offer the Bible, you could offer the teachings of Jesus,
Mm.
you could offer his reassurance.
Okay, but come on, Ruth, this is your chance to say something. What would you say to that little 6-year-old Ruth self?
Mm.
What would be your word of advice to the young person, even the child listening right now?
Mm. That God has everything in hand, that God is sovereign. So, yes, people die. Yes, people suffer. And this is a reality of life, in this fallen world, a world that's been tainted by sin. But if you believe in Jesus, if you believe in what he did for you on the cross, and if you love Jesus and follow his ways, he'll look after you in this life. And your eternal life is guaranteed. So death is nothing to fear.
That's excellent. Excellent last word. Well, thank you so much.
It's a
It's been a
pleasure.
delight always to talk to you, but it's been fascinating talking to you this morning.
Thanks, Mark.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of AP's Profiles in Christian Living as much as I have. I'll try and put a link in the show notes as to Ruth's details, contact details, if you'd like her to come and talk to you or to your church or group about yoga and all things associated. I can vouch for myself. She's an excellent speaker, excellent communicator. And she's also written a great article about her testimony as well, which I'll put there as well. Well, this is Mark Powell for AP's Profiles in Christian Living, and I hope to see you next time.